भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ आप्यायन्तु ममाङ्गानि वाक्प्राणश्चक्षुश्रोत्रमथो बलमिन्द्रियाणि च सर्वाणि। सर्वं ब्रह्म उपनिषदं माहं ब्रह्म निराकुर्यां मा ब्रह्म निराकरोद। निराकरणमस्त्वनिराकरणं मेस्तु तदात्मनि निरतेय उपनिषत्सु धर्मास्ते मयि सन्तु ते मयि सन्तु। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
We'll chant part 3 of Kenopanishad.
ब्रह्महद्देवेभ्यो विजिज्ञे तस्य ब्रह्मणो विजये देवा महीयन्त। त ऐक्षन्तास्माकमेवायं विजयोऽस्माकमेवायं महिमेति। तद्वैषां विजज्ञौ तेभ्योः प्रादुर्बभूव तन्न व्यजानत किमिदं यक्षमिति। तेऽग्निमब्रुवन् जातवेद एतद्विजानीहि किमेतद्यक्षमिति तथेति। तदभ्यद्रवत्तमभ्यवदत् कोऽसीत्यग्निर्वा अहमस्मीत्यब्रवीत् जातवेदा वा अहमस्मीति। तस्मिन् गुस्त्वयि किं वीर्यमित्यपीदगो सर्वं दहेयं यदिदं पृथिव्यामिति। तस्मै तृणं निदधावेतद्दहेति तदुपप्रेयाय सर्वजवेन तन्न शशाक दग्धुं सतत एव निववृतेनैतदशकं विज्ञातुं यदेतद्यक्षमिति। अथ वायुमब्रुवन् वायवेतद्विजानीहि किमेतद्यक्षमिति तथेति। तदभ्यद्रवत्तमभ्यवदत् कोऽसीति वायुर्वा अहमस्मीत्यब्रवीन् मातरिश्वा वा अहमस्मीति। तस्मिन् गुस्त्वयि किं वीर्यमित्यपीदगो सर्वमाददीय यदिदं पृथिव्यामिति। तस्मै तृणं निदधावेतदादत्स्वेति तदुपप्रेयाय सर्वजवेन तन्न शशाका दातुं सतत एव निववृतेनैतदशकं विज्ञातुं यदेतद्यक्षमिति। अथेन्द्रमब्रुवन् मघवन्नेतद्विजानीहि किमेतद्यक्षमिति तथेति। तदभ्यद्रवत्तस्मात्तिरोदधे स तस्मिन्नेवाकाशे स्त्रियमाजगाम बहुशोभमानामुमागुहैमवतीं तागुहोवाच किमेतद्यक्षमिति।
If that is known here, then is the truth established. If not known here, it is the greatest loss. Having reflected through every element, the wise risen from this world become immortal. Here is a very great declaration in this mantra that the purpose of human birth is to realize the Supreme Self. All other creatures are given birth, they have to go through a mechanical living and then just they die. It is a computerized way of living for them. A human being is also similar in his birth, growth, disease, decay, and death as far as the body is concerned. But a human being is superior to all other creatures by virtue of thinking and understanding what the purpose of life is. All other creatures, however intelligent they may be, they cannot ask pertinent questions like this. See, all of us may have different goals in life, and that's how it is. Each person's ambitions, aims are all different. But Vedanta declares that the goal of life is one and the same for all. In fact, the goals that we pursue in life gains meaning only if they are aligned to the ultimate purpose of life or the goal of life. The goal of life is to realize oneself. Though we say that Supreme Self or Brahman is the core of all beings, it is the ultimate nature of all beings, yet that Supreme Dharma is attributed only to human being because only a human being has the potential to raise himself to that level. The evolution from lower creatures until we reach the state of human being seems to be natural, but this is not the ultimate. We have to go further also. From here onwards, we have to put in conscious effort to move forward. That conscious effort, how to move forward, has been given in the sadhana in the previous mantras, that how we have to think of the self, and that is what he is going to say in this mantra also, and then you ultimately become the self. Now imagine that of all the creatures, the human beings are a very minuscule proportion in terms of the population. If you consider all creatures, when I say every creature that is not even visible to our eyes, microorganisms which are there even within our body and without outside, you take into consideration all the germs, insects, plants, grass. I mean, we just cannot count. We cannot count even if you have an acre of land, what is the thing grown there? You just can't count. It's obvious. It is infinity. Of that infinity, we have counted as far as 6 billion or 7 billion human beings to be populated in this earth, and we don't know of any other existence anywhere. What is 7 billion in the totality? It is actually nothing. Nothing. You are not visible in terms of if all the creatures were made to stand one after the other in a small row, the whole of human beings will be totally insignificant. You will not be visible at all. That is the population if you take of birds, animals, everything. So therefore, to be born as a human being, you think how rare it is or how fortunate we are that we are given this birth where we have got the faculty of the intellect to think and move forward. It is a very great boon. It is a blessing of nature or God that you must say that a person is just born as a human being. But of the human beings, who can be considered as real human beings? Because all of us are born with the form of human being, that is, all of us have a head with 2 ears by the side, 2 eyes in the front, and the nose and the mouth. It's the shape of a human being. Obviously, that shape is different from all other creatures. Therefore, we are classified as human beings. But it is just the external feature of a human being. Even in human being, there are various categories. Swami Ramtirtha says, you revise the portion before you write the final examination. Before you write the final examination, you quickly go through all the portions that you have covered in the whole year. Like that, when you attain the human birth also, you go through the portions that you have gone through before, he says. That's the past births. The past births, we have gone through all the creatures that we have gone through. Therefore, the lingering aspects of those creatures are found in many human beings. You will find tendencies of dog in a human being, tendencies of a donkey, tendencies of a tiger, a snake, all these may predominate a human being. Therefore, he really does not qualify fully to be a human. So, in other words, what really makes us a real human being? See, there are certain gunas that are peculiar to human. When you say a nature of a tiger, it is clear, its ferocity and certain shape, etc. If you say a nature of peacock, it is very clear. If you say it's a nature of a snake, it is clear. All snakes are like that. All particular cobra or something, it's like that. Nature of ant, nature of a rose, nature of cow, everything is very clear. But if you ask what is the nature of a human being, one is we say that the ultimate nature. Ultimate nature is the supreme self. That applies to all beings also. But as we said, particularly to human being, because human being has the potential to realize the self. In actual, one in a generation may realize the self, could be a statistic, or 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000. We don't know the number. It's a very, very small percentage who is actually going to realize the self. Therefore, based on that, the ultimate dharma of a human being, the self, is clear. On this extreme, we see that there are swadharma for a human being. Swadharma is an individual nature that pertains to your particular individualistic vasanas. A person is interested in Vedanta, a person is interested in mathematics, a person is interested in business, a person is interested in doing trade or sports or politics or housemaking or whatever. All these come under, or a combination of these also come under Swadharma. Swadharma is your individualistic nature. In between these two, we have to find what is the nature of a human being in general. So, human being in general, we can call them human being based on what they have a faculty known as intellect. So, therefore, if they use the faculty of intellect as a common denominator, we can say they are classified as human being. So, that means a person who thinks. A person who thinks immediately thinks in terms of, thinks means what is the thinking about? Thinking is in terms of what is this life all about? What is our purpose? Then he is able to gather certain values which are in the path towards his ultimate goal. So those who possess those values are real human beings. A person who is a terrorist, who is also mindlessly killing people, can you classify them as human beings? Except by human rights activists, they only classify these terrorists under human beings and fight for their rights. They don't even consider the other side policeman or somebody as human being. Person who is a terrorist is considered a human being only by the human rights activists. These cannot be classified as human beings, real human beings. How can anybody see? In that sense, a general formula is given. What you will really expect others to do to you, that if you are able to think and do it for others, then you are in the starting point of dharma. So a person who follows this dharma can be a real human being. Therefore, the values of ahimsa, satyam, all those things are derived like this. So those who have this values, those who follow certain conduct in terms of achieving this dharma, in general, in the intellect also we say, one who is able to open up his subtle intellect to think in terms of what is the purpose of life. Is there something called God? Who can conceive something beyond this world as transcendental? Such persons qualify as real human beings. Therefore, if you consider even 7 billion population, etc., out of which more will be in terms of a general believers in God also, in their own form, but they'll be pursuing material things and other things. But real human beings is one who has opened up his subtle intellect and asking this question as to what is this existence all about. Therefore, in a general way, we can say the three gunas, when a predominance or some amount of sattva surfaces, because all of us will have all the three gunas till realization, that is there, that is a formula. But a predominance of sattva, a fair amount of sattva, when it surfaces, when it is there in a being, he qualifies to be a real human being. Even then, we may have our weaknesses, our desires and other things, but we will be able to think in terms of how to control them, how to get over them. That will be an introverted approach. He may still be in the path of karma, etc., but he is by and large understood there is a purpose for human life and that he is diligent in his attempt towards that. Put it that way, he qualifies as a real human being. To him, this mantra is addressed. Iha chet avedit data satyam asti. Therefore, if you realize the self here, then your life is accomplished. Truth is established. That is a true life. That is a faithful life. If not, he says, it's a mahati vinashti. Nashti means loss. Vinashti is a great loss. Mahati vinashti is supreme most of greatest loss. It is a double superlative that he has put to express what is the loss that you will go through if you have not done it. See, again I am saying why it is addressed to such a person is he has understood certain things and wants to raise himself. And having come up to certain level, if he doesn't pursue and he is falling down, for him it is the greatest loss. He is not addressing a person who is a terrorist, obviously here. What is the loss for him? He has not gained anything, first of all, to lose. This person who has actually started the path or understood and then he doesn't have the Shraddha to pursue, for such a person, it is an immeasurable loss. And this loss is not like any other loss that you can count in your life. If this is, it is like, see, some people may generally say, okay, if not now, later, or if not this Janma, next Janma. It is not so easy. It is God's fortunate blessing or your karma phala of various Janmas that we even get a satsang. And of that, it's again a great fortune that you get a Sadguru or a right guidance. Having come up to that level and being on the right path and understanding the scriptures properly, and then getting into sadhana and practice is a great boon by itself. So having done all those things, if we do not put that extra effort to clinch it, then it is immeasurable loss. Because once we miss this, there is no guarantee what we chanted just now in the 6th chapter, he says, all your good efforts are not again going to be lost according to the law of karma. But it is an immeasurable waste of time and energy. It is just not that in a series of million births, it's one more birth. The amount of torture that an individual goes through in the 9 to 10 months of period in the womb, at that time, figuratively it is said, that individual thinks no more births, please, because this is very difficult to go through. He goes through various hells also before, but he says this is the greatest punishment. Imagine that individual being confined in a dark room without any space to move for about 9-10 months, where it is amidst all type of impurities and heat and fully dependent on what the mother eats. There is no choice. Even if by mistake, if the mother eats something spicy or something, it is going to affect, and there is no choice that it has to go through. Such a period it goes through, and it is said that a jnana comes at that point of time, that why am I chosen this birth again? But all that jnana goes away the moment it comes out of the womb. This is a philosophical way of explaining. It is said that there is a wind called Shata. That Shata wind blows after you come out, and all this jnana is washed away. You are again brought in the deluded. It cries and continues, and everybody is happy, and it is continuing its journey. That is why a great saint, his name was Shatagopa. Nammalvar was called Shatagopa. Shatagopa means as he is coming out, he is angry at that air that don't delude me. Don't delude me, because I want to continue in this journey of the self only. So he is called as Shatagopa, his name of Lord Narayana. So it is not as easy as we think. that everybody, you ask anyone, they are very genuine about studying Gita or Upanishads or doing their sadhanas or realizing the self. Nobody we can say is insincere. But you ask anybody that their preoccupations are something else, their priority is something else. It is there, but yes, I may not be able to allot time now. Swami Ramtirtha says a time comes where at bayonet's point you are forced to pursue only this. That is the time we realize. So that means there can be various studies, various lectures that you listen to, etc. But at some point of time, there is a awakening within you, that awareness within you. Till such point it comes from within you. All these are only conducive sadhanas to make us go there. Swami, our Swamiji was saying, he was listening to Swami Chinmayananda's lectures regularly in 50s. Swami Chinmayananda had our Paramaguru. He had come down from the Himalayas and he was giving outstanding exposition of Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads to various audiences all over India. So he had the fortune of traveling some time also, and many a time in Chennai also he has listened to the lectures. So after a while being with him and his thought flow, you know really what is the essence of this chapter and what he is going to say, his examples, etc. So that way, Swamiji said, I have listened many times. But one particular lecture, that is the crystallization. He was giving the introduction and he said, what are you really doing in this world? You are actually wasting your time doing every other business except the main business for which you are sent here. He said that lecture struck me so deeply within my heart that he just couldn't be normally himself after that day's lecture. Something was pushing him. That urge was there that I must, leave everything and I have to do this as the priority. Like that, by God's grace or by Guru's grace, when that urge comes, no force on the earth will stop us from pursuing it. Till such time, what to do? Have that yearning, have that deep desire. Because how we even started this journey, that is by somebody's help or grace of the Guru. Exactly like that, the deep pursuit of the self, single pointed pursuit of the self is also Guru's grace. It is also his grace. So therefore, do not leave that yearning or that immense desire for it. That's all we can do. Rest is not in our hands. And then you do your regular sadhana, your morning studies you do, your yoga you do, and your bhajans and kirtans you do, and karma you do. All this you keep going. But remember not to leave this, how much ever we can hold it, as he said in the previous mantra, back of the mind, you keep this and pursuing. Such a person is on the path to truth. There is a story that Swamiji says in the lectures also to indicate this, how people fritter away all the effort that they put, and for paltry sensual pleasures, how they exchange all their efforts and then again start from square one. So you do all the effort and you waste it. There was a person in Kerala, he was considered mad by the villagers. He is a sannyasi. Daily what he used to do, religiously he used to push a big boulder with great difficulty. It's a very heavy boulder. With great difficulty, he used to push it above a small hill. From morning, it will go up to afternoon. So much effort is required. So slowly he will push it upwards. And then, as he has reached the top, within a couple of minutes, he will push it down from there and it will roll down. Next day again, in the morning, he will start pushing up. He will reach by the afternoon, such a strenuous effort, then he will again push it down. So everybody thought, and he will, when it's falling down, he will clap and he will laugh. So everybody thought he is a gone case. And maybe because of this daily thing, it has become a very great tourist attraction also. Everybody used to come and see that. One day, two great renowned sannyasins from Himalayas came and they asked for this person with the name and identification. So they said, oh, that mad fellow, you will see him in the afternoon, something like that, they said. And then he again did this. After he came down, these two people fell at his feet and they were talking something, and finally they took him away. Then only these persons came to know the greatness of that person. That means greatness of that person not for whatever he was doing. He was such a renowned sage and a great rishi from Himalayas that they did not know his value at all. Then they reverentially asked him as to what he was doing all these days. So these two people were saying, didn't you still learn a lesson? He was exactly showing mirror to you what you are doing in your life. You are doing all the effort by your sadhana, whatever you do, and you reach up to a point with great effort. Then you exchange that effort for as paltry sensual pleasures, and that is momentary pleasure. So for that few minutes that it rolls down, it's a great fun. You clap and you laugh. Actually, you have totally wasted all your effort. So again what you do, you start from square one and you do this again. Life after life, day after day, janma after janma, you are doing only this. This is what he is indicating, he said. So therefore, even as we are studying this and enter this part, as I said, that itself is again, it's because of our past karma and grace of Guru and grace of the Lord. It is no doubt about it. Be thankful for that. But from here onwards, one has to put in more effort towards achieving this. Krishna says in chapter 7, verse 3, very in nice verse, he says, Manushyanam sahasreshu kaschit yatati siddhaye yatatam api siddhanam kaschin mam veti tattvataha. Amongst thousands of men, scarce one even strives in this path. Amongst those who strive, scarce one really know me in essence. So it's actually the real stage of realization is 1 in a million, maybe, or 1 in a generation. It could be the statistic. But it really doesn't matter. We must not be discouraged as to whether we will reach that in this Janma. That should not be the focus. The focus should be that I must strive and this is my last Janma. With that spirit, one has to go. See, only one person in a school gets first rank, or in the class gets first rank. So that doesn't mean that all others have to stop studying. Everybody must strive to get first rank. So exactly like that, which and when it will crystallize, we don't know. But without effort, it is not going to crystallize. So therefore, put in as much, and you don't know also how much Janmas you have gone in the past. Maybe you have finished everything. So in the spirit of taking this to be the last Janma, put in all the effort. If you do that type of effort itself, then you will feel extremely satisfied at the end of the life, which is called as a bhavana of kritakritya. Kritakritya bhavana means a satisfaction of doing what we ought to do. If a person even gets that, it's a great feeling. And then, by God's grace, once the train is set on the rail, it will go in the rail only. It's a matter of time. Whether you get it in this Janma, next Janma, it doesn't matter. You just keep on putting in the effort. If we don't do it, it is a great loss. It's an immeasurable loss. So this mantra has to be taken deep into the heart and its meaning has to be felt inside. And then in the second part, he gives again the path, which is a parallel, we said, of what the second mantra of part 1 says. There he says, Atimuchya dhiraha pretyasmat lokad amrita bhavanti. Here he says, Bhuteshu bhuteshu vichitya dhiraha pretyasmat lokad amrita bhavanti. How is it that we are going to reach there? Try to reflect upon the consciousness in every element. Every element means every experience in every being, in everything. There's no other way. This is again a thematic repetition in this Upanishad. In the Upanishad, both the jnana, which is the ultimate self, which is the main purpose of the Upanishad, is given. Alongside, upasana, or the way to reach, or the bhakti, is also given. The lakshya or goal is the ultimate jnana only. But without this upasana, you cannot reach. Therefore, throughout all the Upanishads, we will find various type of upasanas giving. In the Kena Upanishad, one of the recurring themes is to Remember that consciousness within you in and through all this experience. Now, Bhuteshu, we have seen that when you encounter any experience, you try to think in terms of what makes you experience. That is what has been the theme always here. That we have covered many times in the first part also. Again and again, he repetitively said that which not which you hear, that which makes you hear, that which you don't see, that which makes you see. Like that, he has given elaborately, and he has given in the previous mantra also pratibodha viditam matam amritatvam, awareing the consciousness through every experience. So that is clear. In each and every experience, use it as a stimulus to take you introverted inside to catch hold of the self. Another way, not another way, to give the full picture in every element also, in each and every object of your pleasure, in each and every being that you encounter, try to x-ray through them and to find out what is there deep within them. Then also you will hit the same self only. When you are enamored in the name and form of the other person, you lose the objectivity and get involved in the relationship, you get involved in the enjoyment, you get involved in every experience, and that's a momentary passing experience. But he says, Vichitya, reflect again and again. This is what Shankaracharya says in Bhajagovindam. Manasi Vichitya Varam Varam, he says. Fortunately, I think this period is the Shankara Jayanti, isn't it? Adi Shankaracharya's Jayanti is celebrated. It's a remembrance of the great Acharya, without whom Hinduism in the form that we practice now is not possible. Also, very parallelly, 1000th year anniversary celebration of another Jagat Guru, Ramanujacharya. Great Acharyas, I mean, falling more or less is in the same time today. Now, Manasi Vichintya Varam Varam, that means reflect on it again and again. Where does he say that? In Bhajagovindam verse 3, he says that he gives a Pratipaksha Bhavana. That Pratipaksha Bhavana means viewing the experience from the other side or the opposite side or from the Pratipaksha, that is the counter angle. A person is attracted to a form of a woman, so he looks at the bosom and the navel region and he says he goes into a frenzied delusion. The moment the mind gets lost in the name and form like that, your mind loses its objectivity and it's a frenzied delusion. When you see something very close, you don't see the full picture. Like you hold this like this, you will not be able to read anything until you keep it from a distance, then only you will be able to have some clarity about it. Like that, the rose, a child sees the color of the rose and goes and tries to pluck it. There is a thorn also embedded in the rose that it is not able to see. Only with knowledge, with education, and then you will also know how to carefully pluck the rose and carefully relate with the rose. It's possible, but you have to understand the other side. This is a thorn and rose and petals are all a combination. That's how you get it. So he says, you ask that person, why is he falling for that girl or girl for a boy? They may have, in that moment of emotion, they may give various points. And you try to again reflect on it deeply within each of it. Suppose if he says, you see the beautiful hair of that girl, it's so beautiful, so flowing and nice. Oh, hair is so nice. Then you cut that hair and give it to him. He will not just he will have a revulsion. He will not like it. Hair of a person, how will anybody like it? If somebody is to like it, then he's a different category of person. Or if he says the smile is nice, the teeth is nice, the teeth alone you give, that is not possible to relate. The chi, blood, or something which is very very beautiful about it, that blood alone is not easy to relate to, right? But what is the mind's delusion here? All these things put together gives a angle that it is very likable, nails or anything for that matter you take. So therefore, it is not in these elements per se, there is something else that he is liking. That is what one needs to reflect. Anything for that matter you take. Some person may like, a South Indian may like curd rice and a pickle. Ask him to eat only the rice, it is not possible. Ask him to eat only curd, it's not possible beyond a point. Pickle alone, not. But all this put together is what is a great nectar. A sort of a feeling comes. Again, it is not that you need not enjoy the combination, but individual elements, all of which you don't like, how can the combination be of liking? Think about it. So, in each and every element, if you go into deeper, there is something else. Something else. What we see outside is the name and form only. So, you take anything for that matter, it is made up of certain name and certain form, which occupies certain space. It has a causation to it, it has a time frame to it. The time, space and causation are the three-forked thing which holds that object, and that object has a name and form. You break that into particles. Science now helps us to break everything beyond a point, becomes blurred. It is molecules inside, it is atoms inside, and all the elements, atoms are the same. You break that further inside and further inside, you really do not know what is that basic element that it is made up of. That Vedanta says is the same unique thing which is there in everything. So, but in the external form that we see, that seems to be very attractive. So he says, in each and every element that you experience, reflect deeply that what you see is actually the self. This is a very scientific approach. But practically people have done this. It is, as we said, the formula is the same. What you are really thinking of inside, that is what is really you are going to project outside and see. So a constant thought of God in any way that is inside is what you are going to see outside also. So therefore the open eye meditation is based on your thought process. There was a great saint, I forgot his name, in South India. He was a great devotee of Lord Shiva. There is a village near Tanjavur. Every day he used to cross the river Kaveri, go to the temple on the other side in the Sandhya time, in the evening time, and attend the Arati, take this Vibhuti Prasad that they give and come back. This is one day also he will not miss. Like that has been the practice. One day as he was about to go, that day was a heavy rain and Kaveri was extremely flooded. So he could not go and he was very, very deeply saddened and upset about it. He went to the banks and he was about to turn back, when the priest of the temple came and he said, "Sir, I was waiting for you today, why you didn't come?" And he gave the prasad. He was very touched, and he took as God's grace and he applied himself and they parted. After that, when he was going to home, suddenly it struck to him, Kaveri was flooded. I was not able to go from this side to that side. How did that priest come from other side to here? How it is possible? It is just not possible. Therefore he knew who had come. It was Shiva himself who came in that form. And therefore, a little bit of positive sadness again came into his heart that he came in front of me and I missed him. And I missed him completely. So therefore, from that time onwards, there was a resolve in his mind that whoever he saw, he would carefully see whether it is Lord Shiva, because he should not miss him again. So wherever and whoever he saw, he was trying to see Lord Shiva only, and his vision became completely of Shivamaya. Shivamaya means he became ultimate. The point is he went on to realize the self because of his constant vision of Shiva everywhere. This is what it is. Bhuteshu Bhuteshu Vichitya In each and every being, he did not then see the name and form. He did not see the relationship, whether that person is a friend or enemy or anything. He was able to visualize this God. How can this come unless otherwise there is an immense, intense desire for seeing it again? So, in each and every element, be it a living being or non-living being, you go towards the atom, you go towards the each and every core of the being. It is nothing but one thing that is pulsating everywhere. Wise people, dhiraha. Dhiraha means valorous people, a strong-willed people. Put it that way. Strong-willed people are able to reflect the self in each and every experience, and then Pretya, having risen over this world, Amrita Bhavanti, they become immortal. There is a parallel that Swamiji has quoted verbatim, almost verbatim. We find two quotations in Bible. Before that, as we said in mantra 2 of part 1, the term used is Atimuchya, completely freed. Here, the term used is Vichitya. There's only a very subtle difference, as we said. There it makes a declaration that people freed attain immortality. Here it gives a path as to how you attain immortality. You attain immortality by reflecting over it again and again and again. There's no other way. Constant reflection gives you the depth of perception. That is the point here. So here is two quotations from Bible. Saint Matthew 10:39. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. Per se, again, it doesn't make any sense if a person has to read it word verbatim. It makes sense only when we understand this Upanishadic mantra. He who findeth his life shall lose it means one who has found his life in this world. Okay, he is well settled. How are you? Very well settled. Thank you. That person has lost it. He has lost it. And he who shall loseth his life for my sake. He who is living a life of truth in this world for the sake of realization of the self shall find it. It means the self here. Saint Luke 9:24. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, but whosoever will lose his life for my sake, the same shall save it. Same meaning. So verbatim. Now this is not to again go into research whether Jesus was in India to study Upanishad, etc. And there are other extreme also. Whether Jesus as a person lived itself is a question mark. People say it really doesn't matter. What really we must understand here is, if you don't, I mean, it's not. We are not being fanatically attached to Vedanta, but the statements in Bible or Quran will make much sense if you are able to interpret it from Upanishadic point of view. Nothing else will make sense otherwise. So common to me means only the figure of Christ, and you think like that. It doesn't. Me means the self. If you are able to say, then it makes sense. So therefore, understanding of Bible or Quran or anything, even if the statements are there, if it is in the proper way, it should be through a proper training of Vedantic literature. Now, why it is not just my literature versus your literature? The theme is very scientific as far as Hinduism is concerned. It is very scientific. Then you are able to understand it in a scientific way. Then only you will be able to make sense out of those interpretations here. If that is known here, then is truth established. If not known here, it is the greatest loss. Having reflected through every element, the wise risen from this world become immortal. Part 3 of the Upanishad. It's very interesting. Part 1 and 2 gives the ultimate revelation of the truth, and also has given Upasana, which is Nirguna Upasana. Nirguna Upasana, just to recap, is when you are able to worship the Brahman in its purest form without any attributes or qualities, which is very difficult. But that is what is uncompromisingly said, because Upanishads cater to the highest level of students there. And the theme of Kenopanishad is the self is nothing but the consciousness pulsating within you. That is what is making everything function in the world. And none of the equipments that you have is capable of reaching it, contacting it, experiencing it, touching it. Not possible. It is that very subject which is the experiencer in its purest form. This is the recurring theme of the Upanishad. As we said, all the Upanishads, the theme is the self, but the angle with which they deal with the self may be different. This is the angle of Kena Upanishad. In the part 3, Saguna Brahman is introduced in the form of a story. Saguna means with gunas, quality. Again, this quality is not our normal quality. This is a specific quality which is attributed to self alone. The qualities which are attributed to this is when it is in conjoinment with Maya. But obviously, Brahman is beyond Maya. It is not caught by Maya. But then it assumes the quality of all-knower, all-pervading, infinite. All these are qualities which is attributable. Therefore, when you are able to worship Lord as an individual now, as a Jiva now, you are a limited small entity, whereas he is the infinite entity to whom you can surrender. Of all these qualities, there are infinite qualities that are said also. Vedas say that whether he himself knows his end, whether we do not know, he says. That is the Ananta quality that the Ishvara has. But what is, okay, he is all powerful, he is all pervading, he is infinite. What is it there for me? There's something for you, something for all of us. He is also Sarva Sharanya, means he is there as a refuge for all of us. If there is into infinite, if you take refuge, the finite also becomes infinite. This is the formula. Therefore, if you are able to worship him as a Ishvara with form also, there's nothing wrong about it. It is all about each person's level and his inspiration. But here, the story is given, but the symbolic meaning of it is again pertaining to what has been explained before. And then in the fourth part, he is giving certain instructions and certain direct advices. There was a war between Devas and Asuras. Devas and Asuras are gods and demons. And then, with the help of Brahman, the supreme god, the gods were able to defeat the Asuras. The Devas were able to defeat the Asuras. But in the heat of the victory, they were completely in a very great enjoyment mode, and they said, this victory is indeed ours. And instead of praising the Supreme Lord because of whom they won, they completely forgot him, and they were putting Jay for themselves, for Indra Jay, for Agni Jay, like that it is for Vayu, all these gods, these are all gods. So they were enjoying and they were celebrating the victory. So the Supreme God Brahman wanted to teach a lesson. And very interesting, how did it teach a lesson? It did not do anything. It just appeared there, that's all. It appeared in the form of a yaksha, in the form of an apparition. In a particular form it is appearing. And as they are enjoying, suddenly they see that there is something there, which they can never recognize what it is. So there is a confusion in their mind. Who is this? Whether it could be the enemy still lurking, or who is this? They are completely unaware as to who is this. So therefore, first they request the great god Agni, fire god, you please go and try to find out who this person is. And Agni went, he agreed and he went near that apparition. And before Agni could find out, That apparition is asking the question, who are you? He says, I am Jataveda, I am Agni. Another name is Jataveda. Jataveda means all knower. Oh, is it? What do you do? What is your power? Oh, my power? I can burn everything in this world. That is my power. Anything in this world, I can make it into ashes within a second. That is the power. Oh, I see. Then he says, he takes a grass, a blade of grass, and he puts it there. Try to burn this. So Agni takes it lightly, and then he uses all his power. Forget about burning, it couldn't even be heated. The grass is maintaining the same freshness as it had before. So, embarrassed and humiliated, Agni comes back and he says, I don't know who that person is. And then all the gods now request the next person who is in the hierarchy higher, Vayu. So to Vayu they request, you must go and find out who this is, and he also agrees. He goes there, and before he could say anything, the apparition is asking, who are you? I am Matarishva. I am Vayu. Matarishva is Vayu, mover in the sky. Is it? What is your power? I can blow away anything in this world. Anything in this world, they can't stand my power. That is why it is powerful than Agni also, finally. It can't stand. Is it? Then again, the same, not a different grass also, same grass is there. It is putting there, and he says, blow this away. Then the Vayu tries with all his power, not even a centimeter it moves here or there. Then again, embarrassed, and he admits his defeat and comes back and says, leave me, I can't understand who that person is. Finally, they all request their leader, who is Indra. Indra is called Maghavan. So, Indra also goes there. Only slight different in approach, that Indra goes there not with a great haughtiness but with some humility. As Indra approaches there, the form disappears. Tasmat Thirodate. Thirodana. Thirodana is one of the functions of the Lord. Lord is said to manifest 5 exclusive functions which are only for him. Creation, maintenance, destruction, manifestation, and withdrawing, revealing and withdrawing. You see this mentioned in the commentary of chapter 11 of Gita, where Lord shows the Vishwarupa that is revealing himself. Only Lord can do. Nobody else can. These functions, see, Adi Shankaracharya says, even as an individual gains lot of power and upon realization, even if he is getting into the feeling of the lordship there, not really egoistically, even if he, like Ramtirtha says, the whole world is my creation, all the sun and moon are my eyes and ears, the whole forest is my hair, all this thing when he says also, you may have that extreme feeling which is not really a statement that is coming out of Mr. Ramtirtha, it is the self that is there. But still Adi Shankaracharya says, individual cannot become Ishvara with reference to these 5 functions. Srishti, Sthiti, Samhara, Thirodana and revealing. I don't know what the name is. These 5 are exclusive for him. Thirodana means suddenly he will disappear. And suddenly he will appear. And the entire going into manifestation and unmanifestation and by way which this world is maintained, etc. These are all exclusive for that supreme power only. Now, when Indra goes there, suddenly the apparition withdraws itself and there is a vacuum. In that same place, Haimavati, Uma, daughter of Himavan, the great goddess Parvati, she is the goddess in Kalahasti. Brihat Sunchara Kuchalamba, I think her name is. She is the Brahma Vidya Swarupini. She is there. She is bedecked with jewels. She is so beautiful. And to that goddess, very humbly, Indra submits himself and asks, who was that who was standing here? And the third part ends here. The story is there, and he asks the question, who is that who was standing here? And the chapter closes. Answer for that chapter comes in the fourth. So I leave it to you here. Think about it as to why it is placed like this. And then it is easy that you think about the symbolism behind this. It's quite easy. It's a very, very beautiful allegoric story, giving the same theme of Upanishads but in a very beautiful way. This story, if you say to a child also, it is very interesting. So a Upanishad can be introduced to a child also through the story. Later when he asks, who is Indra, who is Vayu, who is Agni, who is that apparition, who is Uma? Wow, it is a great revelation when we understand the parallel. See, this type of thing is also very common in Upanishad. Various stories and symbolic representation it is given. One thing is it makes us really think. Second thing is it makes us interesting. Otherwise, just by saying consciousness and this only, beyond a point, a person cannot take, I wouldn't call it a dry thing, but it is very difficult to sit through. See, suppose, how many people can survive a lecture of even a Newton or Einstein if they are going to talk about nuclear physics pure way? Only few students who are attuned and who have reached that level they can do. Otherwise, it will be going too much above our head. But if they are able to bring in certain practical examples and jokes and other thing in between, that makes it interesting for all others also to follow. So probably that also could be one of the reasons why these techniques are there. But more importantly, it makes us deeply think. And when you come to Itihasa and Purana, it is abundant. So many stories, so many things are given, which certain things have to be literally understood, certain things have to be symbolically understood. So that is why in our parampara or in our tradition, they said, first go through the stories when a person is as a child is able to understand Puranas, Itihasa, Ramayana, Harishchandra's story, all these things. And then he is able to approach Gita and Upanishads later. He will be able to also correlate and understand. But directly, if somebody is going to say, I am going to jump into Upanishad, the Veda Mata herself says he is sure to misunderstand me. It is not possible. Particularly in the era or yuga that we are living, where our intellect is very perverted, etc., it is not possible for us to directly grasp the meaning. So therefore, it is very important that we understand through these stories also. Yes, sir.
Two questions. What is the difference between manifestation and revelation and disappearance? The five qualities that we talked about manifestation and then also revelation.
No. Revealing himself. Manifestation is showing himself. Revealing. It's the same.
It's the same. Okay.
It's the same.
Okay. And what is the relationship between sadhana and upasana?
Upasana is one of the sadhanas. Sadhana, we say, is the effort. Upasana is the main sadhana in terms of upa-asana, sitting near. So that which makes your mind sit near, go near, Brahman is called upasana. It is essentially to do with bhakti and your feeling towards the Lord. That's what we discussed before. But sadhana can be taken as a general thing. Tapasya, yajna, dana, karma, all these things are sadhana. Various sadhanas at various levels, what we inspire, that we do. We'll conclude with the bhajans here.
Mukunda Ananda Govinda Radhe
पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः